Recording's on. It is 7:03 p.m. Wednesday, April 19th, and welcome to this edition of the Southborough Historical Commission. Calling the meeting to order again at 7:03 with all members present, Jim Blaschke, myself, Kevin Miller, Grant Farrington, Annie Pfaff, and Michelle Hokinson. And Grant has very graciously agreed to take some minutes for us tonight, an issue that we'll get to shortly. And I bow down to you, Grant, for being so gracious about it.
I will try my best.
It's a challenge, but you know, it's yeah. Someday we're gonna work on the select board to restore that funding for minute takers. But until then, thank you for stepping in. Is there any public comment before we get going? No. All right. Well, that'll return at the end of this session. So what I have then on our third item already, how's that quick, is, you know, Kate Battles, alas, and with our everlasting gratitude for 6+ years of stellar service, including as minute taker for the last year or so, has stepped aside, a lot of family commitments and other things coming up for her. And so we are without a vice chair. And that's actually, for me, a pretty important role to sort of fill right away, because, you know, in the event that I'm not available or something happens, I can't do the meeting or whatever it is, we want to be able to sort of go forward smoothly. The other part of this is that with the DDBL stuff, if I'm out of the loop, you know, the vice chair has sort of have to step in and act in a kind of timely fashion. So, you know, it's important. And actually, there's you know, that OpenGov thing that we sort of track DDBL activity on. It's really important that the vice chair understand what's going on in that respect. So that's where we're at. And again, I don't want to skate past too fast the fact that I am eternally grateful to Kate Battles for everything she's done for us, and is still in the clerk's office, kind of a friend of the Historical Commission and helpful on any number of points. So, but we do need to move on and get a vice chair. And so I don't know how folks feel about it. I know, you know, people are busy. You know, Grant and Michelle have recently taken on a second committee, and it's a big commitment. It's a lot of work. I'll just put it out there, and everybody can sort of give their opinion and you know, offer up what they like. But Annie, having stepped aside from CPC and sort of be focused entirely on historical, strikes me and as a good choice to come forward if she's willing to do it and do it. You know, having been around, you know, a fair amount of time at this point, knowing the deal, having the time, and I think hopefully Annie's willing to do it. That would be my suggestion. And this is, by the way, something, you know, when we go through the, you know, vote officers or whatever for like the next fiscal year, we'll do it in July. We can revisit all of this stuff. But I think, you know, for now, that's what I would suggest. And that's obviously, if anybody else really wants to do it, say so. Or if somebody wants to, I'll nominate Annie Pfaff as vice chair. If someone wants to second that.
Well, Annie, I think that's a great idea. If you're willing, I'm happy to second it. I don't want to see you taking on something without.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to serve. And you know, in my recent kind of stepping back from CPC, I have a little bit more capacity to do that. And you know, as I've mentioned, you know, my focus is on historical. So you know, I would be more than happy to serve in that role and you know, help Kevin as vice chair.
Well, then Seconded, so seconded, Annie Pfaff for vice chair.
Any discussion?
I think it's a great choice, and I look forward to supporting your nomination, Annie.
All right, well, motion made, seconded, and accepted. Can we roll call vote on this? Grant?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Jim?
Aye.
Miller is aye, and Annie
I'll abstain.
abstains. So that's 4-0-1. Congratulations, Annie Pfaff, our new, or condolences, the new vice chair. Related to this is Annie, of course, is currently serving as treasurer. Now, Annie points out that there hasn't been anything to do as treasurer over this fiscal year because we've had this issue with the sign production, historic house signs production, which has been the primary sort of, beneficiary of our budget, modest though it is. And so I think, Annie, if you're willing, I don't see any problem with you serving a dual role because there's really nothing to do right now as treasurer.
Yeah, I agree.
Until the sign program gets going and we're actually spending money on stuff. And my suggestion, if it's amenable to the rest of the commission, would be to have Annie, co-serve in those roles rather than kind of make a big sort of kerfuffle about, and then revisit it again in July. And maybe at that point, we'll be going on the sign. I know, Annie, that you're, told me that, you're willing to sort of really lean into that sign program and try to get a new sign maker for us and get it going. So once that's going, maybe we will need a treasurer that maybe you want to hand off those duties, if you remain as vice chair. So, if we keep with the present structure. So is that agreeable with everybody, just to leave the treasurer stuff alone? Nods, good.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Let's leave it as is and move on. All right. Item 4, and this is the main thing I want to talk about tonight, is the historical components of the St. Mark Street Park. Now, Grant's been on the working group, of course, from day one. I joined whatever it was. It feels like an eternity ago, but it was just, I believe, May, about a year or so ago. I had been there, watching and trying to help and advise from the beginning. But it's felt like a very long haul. And I just to sort of tee this up, because we have a couple of people that I invited actually to speak to us in this regard, is that, because the history of that park and in a way, the politics and the legality of it and the land ownership and all that stuff was so complicated, and it invariably sort of drew the working group into, in a way, all kinds of issues that really weren't in the charge, but also there were the complications pursuant to the archaeological investigation and the concern about Native American burials and, a million issues that the working group wrestled with mightily, over the course of a year. It happened, and because we were also waiting, of course, we didn't get, the dig happened last September. We didn't get full sign off from the Mass Historical Commission until I believe it was November, and then the report was issued and everybody had to go through that. And so, and by that point, there was a kind of a big rush to get some preliminary design and try to get things ready for town meeting. And, and of course that was happily, for all concerned, approved. And we've moved past that, the legal hurdles and all that kind of stuff. But in all that, and in all that, difficult work, the historical component has always been very difficult to pin down. And quite frankly, on the working group, there wasn't a lot of time spent on it. And of course, as it was originally pitched as a historical walk, and that was its own source of controversy and kerfuffle for quite a while. So, Grant and I have been there, in a way, largely. I came on, I felt my primary mission was the dig, and getting clarity and resolution on that, which we did. And Grant's been doing yeoman work from day one, but a lot of our attention has been just on the general aspects of the park and to try to get it through and try to move it forward and come to some consensus. So the question of the historical components, quite frankly, has languished at times. And I've tried to bring it forward, and Grant has done the same. And so where we're at, if you were at town meeting and you saw the plans, which I can bring up a version of it, there's essentially trees, a walkway that splits off partly that let's say commences at the kind of western edge of the park, closest to like the St. Mark's ball fields, comes down through two landings, a larger one and a smaller one, branches off. One part goes toward the library property, and is apparently slated to continue through that, toward the back entrance of the library, and one down to Marlborough Road. Some trees, a rain retention kind of feature, there's a couple of plazas, an enhanced windbreak for the old burial ground, which I felt was a win for us, because that's something we'd advocated for. And somewhat of a blank slate right now in terms of the historical components. Now, the chair of the working group is called for what they hope, I think Marguerite Landry and select board members hope is going to be like a final meeting of the working group in May to review plans by VHB and sort of button this whole thing up. I think that's a little ambitious. I'm going to, participate in all good faith to try to make it so. But the question of what we want, and the other thing I'd say is this has been a very difficult thing for me to wrestle with. At one point, I presented a plan. Michael Weisson's on the call happily with us. That was drawn up by Michael. And that featured sort of 4 stops. It would have been like 4 smaller plazas rather than one large plaza and a smaller kind of way station. That helps with ADA compliance and the ability to navigate this upward slope of the parcel as you move from east to west. So for instance, in Michael's plan, when it had shown 4 stops, I started thinking of possibly sort of 4 themes for the stops. The park had finally, after a lot of, I would think confusion, started to coalesce around this idea put forward by Patty Burns-Fiore and Sally Waters that had to do with what they identified as, and it's an agreed notion of the 3 components that were necessary to incorporate Southborough as a town in 1727, meaning a training ground or mustering ground, a burial ground, and a meeting house, which is since been replaced by Pilgrim Church, but that's what it stands as. So from that main plaza they conceived of, you can see to basically to the northwest, where the mustering ground would have been, of course, if you're immediate south, the old burial ground, and to the sort of southwest, Pilgrim Church. So you can see those 3 components from that spot. That was a coherent idea. I think everybody on the working group embraced it, and certainly I did as part of it. We'd also discussed heavily, of course, the Nipmuc presence, and I had a very strong feeling, and I think there's general agreement on the working group that they have to be noted and honored in that space as well. And of course, although the archaeological dig did not find burials, or for that matter, Native American artifacts, that doesn't, the presence, I think, is historically well documented as being in that area. And of course, Greg Walwer explained to us where he thinks the Native American burials likely are, and that is incorporated inside the walls of the OBG in the northeast corner perhaps under the walls or perhaps just outside in that scrim of trees that remains. So I think that's a no-brainer as well. Third, I had thought that the archaeological dig itself told a very interesting story and speculated there might be some way to incorporate that. Fourth would have been the story of William Washington, which we have discussed on previous calls, right? This is the guy who was acknowledged in Nick Noble's book as, Nobles calls him the first free Black resident of Southborough. I would add that his wife was also along with him and co-equal and a resident of Southborough. But in any case, William Washington and his family, it's a fascinating story. He was only in Southborough. Sally Waters has done a great deal of very interesting research on William Washington, which if I have not shared it with you, I can send it out. But it's quite good. And one of the things she identifies is that William Washington himself, although his son succeeded him as steward of St. Mark's and sexton of St. Mark's Church, William Washington was only in those roles for a fairly short number of years, like a half a dozen years, roughly 1898, 99 to 1905. The interesting feature about his story was that bit we've discussed here before, where there was like the gas explosion at St. Mark's, and he's sort of credited as his hero for like saving the school and putting out the fire, and he was seriously burned and rewarded by the school, and all this kind of, it's a very, very interesting story. So I thought that would go there. It also allowed for a discussion of the plantings, although I think that's kind of moved somewhat off screen. But those were the four components. But I have to say, I've always struggled to sort of put it together in a kind of coherent narrative. If Indian or Native American remains had been found on the site, it would have been game over and the story would have been dictated for us. And unlike, let's say, the park at Southville, where you have that kind of a placard explaining the mill, usage of that area of town and the bell that summoned the workers in the center of the park. It's a very cohesive story. It's a much more difficult tale to tell in the St. Mark's Triangle. Now, Greg Walwer, right, found hundreds of artifacts, mostly very small fragments of pottery and a lot of coal. Remember that? Only like one personal thing. It was like a button back. But the interesting part of this, and in our among the gallery, modest though it is, two people that I asked to come tonight, which is Dan Blanchard, who is one of the original members of the working group, and Michael Wyson, the president of the Historical Society. And I want to let them talk for themselves, but I will say, if you recall, Dan Blanchard, who does, is of course in the faculty at Fay and, does archaeological work over at Fay and has got a lot of experience in this area. He was the fellow, walking around the site after it was first cleared, like every time it rained, and picking up pottery, fragments, artifacts, all kinds of stuff. And at one point, Dan very kindly turned over to my custody for they're like baking trays I have from him full of pottery. And when Greg Walwer came to do the dig, I went down there on day one and I said, Greg, come over and look what I got in my trunk. And I showed him all that stuff, and he immediately, Dan had already identified some of it, and Greg looked at it and he knew a bunch of it on site. I'm still in possession of that. Again, Greg found some 500 artifacts. The interesting part of this is that Dan got in touch with me over the last week or so and said, I've got more stuff. Do you want it? And well, that was going to lead to the idea of no good deed goes unpunished for my friend Dan, because when I saw him, I don't want to steal all your thunder, Dan. I know you're here, but I went to see him a couple of days ago, and he gave me all this stuff, and it's sort of this time Chinette plates of more stuff, and some of it's big stuff. And some of it's very interesting. This is a piece of a cup or mug handle. Dan will probably explain it better than me. One of the things he came up with is, let's see if I can find it here. Golly, where did I put it? Oh, here we go. Can you see? Can you actually see that? It's a jam jar. Again, Dan will explain it, but I believe 1875. Another piece. This one is really interesting. Hold that up. You see that? What this is, because I figured this out myself. I hope Dan's proud of me. This is Staffordshire purple transferware. And there's actually a fragment on the back that you could read the sort of maker's signature. It's Thomas Mayer. It's the Canova pattern, produced in Stoke-on-Trent, England, circa 1835. And it's not the only piece of this kind of fine china. There's other sort of blue transferware. I believe Dan has identified. So there's those kinds of, he's got a whole plate here of some very large pieces of more kind of common glazed pottery that, for instance, Greg Walwer has indicated would have been associated with institutional use at St. Mark's. And then there's a third plate full of glassware fragments. And again, I want to get Dan on to speak to this, but he identifies some of this as really quite old. So, you know, in a way, it's a kind of interesting and somewhat, I wouldn't say shocking, but because I think Greg Walwer would have concurred that, sure, this stuff would continue to, percolate up from the mud. And of course, Greg was here in September. Dan is walking over there, early April after the winter rains. So Dan and I talked for, again, no good deed goes unpunished. I took an hour and a half out of his Sunday, I believe, and then asked him to come here. And so, Dan, I'm bringing you over. And I would just, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And I would just like, because what I'm looking to get tonight from my fellow historical commissioners is, when Grant and I go back to this meeting in a couple of weeks, what we want to ask for. And, you had, when we spoke the other day, had what I thought was a very good suggestion about, for instance, display possibilities in the library for this material, some of this material, and the fact that, for instance, you pointed out to me, and I've done my own eBay looking since, like, can you buy this piece of Staffordshire transferware? Answer, yes, intact. And so, Dan had made the suggestion that, for instance, the jam pot, is that what it is, Dan?
It's marmalade.
Marmalade.
Yeah, Keeler and Sons marmalade.
Right, so that you could actually buy this intact piece of this for like $100 and display it as, here's the fragment, and this is what it actually is, right? Go ahead. I've talked way too much.
So all the way back at the very beginning, and this is why I have a sister who works for the trustees of reservations. And this is what she sent me, which was the review and compliance by Mass Historic Commission, right? And it says, under state review, any projects that require funding, licenses, or permits from any state agency must be reviewed by MHC in compliance with the Massachusetts general laws. Right. And, I think at this point, bringing MHC in and seeing what they think, or contacting other state agencies, right? Like, there's no point in building a park when you don't even know what you have under the ground yet.
Well, of course, they've reviewed Greg's full report, Greg Walworth's full report, and basically at this point have signed off on it. And
Okay.
I think it would be interesting, I think, to have at least a conversation, if I can get Ed Bell as the state archaeologist on the phone, and just I'd like to discuss the issue of the artifacts, and that we continue to find, like this. Here's one piece that Dan brought up that's pretty significant in size. They're not minor. Now, you're not going to find, right, Dan, we discussed the fact that and this comports with Greg Walworth's view of it, that basically what we're finding is trash.
Yeah, it's a trash site, and I think
Right.
I think all of the charcoal, I think all of the ash, the style of the foundation would lend itself to some sort of like incinerator, right? You're burning trash. This is well before any kind of public dump or dump scenario. A lot of the time people handle their own trash. It may be a communal lot to incorporating St. Mark's as well.
Right.
But I mean, I think that's what we're looking at. So we're probably not going to find whole objects. But the objects that I have found span 300 years.
Right. And I think that was one of the things, and this may sort of dovetail with what Michael Wison might have to say, is that I think one of the things that emerged from my conversation with you, Dan, and for the rest of you folks, is that, there is an evolving, there's not one sort of like hyper sexy, you can hang the story of the park on a single element. But what it does tell, as Dan and the artifacts that Dan has uncovered, and adding to the ones that Greg Walworth pulled up. I mean, I picked up a few myself just walking around the site. Here's one that's been sitting on my desk for months. Very pretty piece of blue transferware. That there is a story there to tell about the changing usage of that land, right? That it was, I think, agreed upon. If not the precise, certainly the general site of Nipmuc habitation. Then it passes over to the town. There's the William Washington story, which is a brief little interlude and a much longer tale, right? And remember, the house that Washington, as we understand it, is thought to have inhabited, which is thought by Greg Walworth to be beneath the pollinator garden behind the library at this point. That would have been the site of the house itself. That house was owned by Joseph Burnett. And who lived in it before that is unclear, but the first inhabitant wasn't William Washington. You know what I mean? So there is an evolving kind of story in this whole area. And so I was appreciative of Dan for continuing to come up with these artifacts and reminding me that
I think that I'm sorry, Kevin, but I think the important thing is, right? So the artifacts are their artifacts, right? Broken bits and pieces, 90% largely unidentifiable, whether it's glass or ceramic or whatever. But it's what you're doing is creating an archaeological record of the town, right? Which is physical, right? And what we found out with Nick Noble's book and all of these other different pieces, right? Written word, there is still, no matter how well you work, the written word will always be inaccurate. In some areas, in some versions of history, and certainly depending on who's writing the history and who's got the bias, right, you're going to have all of those issues in the word. But what's the science is the pieces, is the whether it's the bones, whether it's the artifacts, whether it's the headstones, right, or the buildings, right? Those are those are the pieces. And so I don't think the park can reflect one story when you're talking about something that is really the nexus point.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that entirely. And so I think maybe one of the things for us to talk about is how we could integrate the story told by these artifacts into what we're trying to get across at the park. And I really, Dan, I'm grateful to you, both for the artifacts, but also for the suggestion that to really tie this back to the library, because I think the library may well be a very natural place to display some of this material if they're willing to have it, or, we can find room for it, and to kind of refer people who become interested in something, but you can't tell a comprehensive story inside that park, but to refer them, to the library. And the opportunity, let's say, to sort of sit in that park, eat your sandwich, think your thoughts, and then maybe stroll down that path to the library and then find a spot where you could actually look at some of this stuff, I think is really a nice idea. So,
Yeah, I like the idea of, right, you're not like, so what is historic Southborough? Right, and it's not a narrow window of time, right? It's an incredibly long period. So it's fascinating when you can look at how land is used, how that area is used, how that intersection of 85 and 30 was used.
yeah, this is right what I was talking about the other day with Michael. So can I, with everybody's indulgence, let me bring Michael in for a second. Hi, Michael, you're with us.
Am I with you?
You are. Good evening.
Good evening.
So
Good
Dan
evening,
raised,
our commission members. It has been a long time. Hello, hello.
happy to
Hello.
have you.
Hello.
And Grant Dan having raised this issue of the crossroads of 85 and 30. I know this was what you and I chatted about the other day, and I'd love to have you tell this to the rest of the commission.
And I will in just 1 second, because when I said hello, I set my dog off. This is the problem for being at home. So just hang on just 1 second. Jaxie, shh. That wasn't someone coming to the door. Hello, commission members. So what we were talking about was the conception of this being a crossroads, an historical crossroads from the very beginning of time, practically. Route 30 and Route 85, but mostly 30, were hugely ancient Indian trails. The Route 30 wound its way to the seacoast eventually and was to the shell grounds for the summer that most of the tribes used and shared seemingly together these shell beds of shellfish off the coast. And in the summer months, they would migrate down towards the coastal area and enjoy the harvest of the shellfish and seafood. And then in the winter, fall and winter, would come back on 30, which is the old Connecticut path that goes all the way down to Hartford, which also tells you something about its longevity. And 85, of course, was another cross section that linked the Native American weirs on the river to the plantation areas in, vaguely in Marlborough and Southborough, and actually presumably right around the area of St. Mark's. And these trails seemingly are thousands of years old. It's interesting, we did a post for the Historical Society at one point where we overlaid all the single digit Massachusetts Road, Route 1, Route 2, Route 4, Route 5, and overlaid them on the known Indian trails. And they're almost an exact match. Route 2, especially, all the way out. I mean, it's just, it's pretty amazing. So what you've had at this parcel has always been a composite story. It's been a story of the Nipmuc tribes. It's been a story of the devastation of the early plagues of the 1600s. It's been a story of the blending of the tribes with the Massasoit, because the Nipmucs were really depopulated. So it's never been entirely clear what the Indian population was here in Southborough, because we're right on the border between the Massachusetts and the Nipmuc tribes. So it's a story of that. It's a story of historically also the burial grounds that were associated with the borders of these roads, which is where the first settlers decided to incorporate their own burial grounds. You have the springs on the hillside that were always part of one of the reasons that the fields of the Native Americans were located in this area is that there were natural springs, which the library has discovered, much to its dismay, flowing out of that hillside. And then, of course, then you have the whole story of European settlement and how that happened and why people settled here on that hill, because it was cleared, it had fields, it had a water supply, it had a burial ground. I mean, so, you know, one of the things I was talking with Kevin the other day was this conceptualization of thinking about this not as a single historical narrative, but as a continuum. And part of the process that we're trying to do with the society, and by the way, I would argue, just for my own personal purposes, that I think the Historical Society and the new museum that we're building might be a logical place to put some of this collection, and not necessarily the library, but that'll be a story for another day. But the fact is that one of the things that we're proposing in this historical walk is utilizing what is not really a new technology, but it's newly applied, which is the idea of using these QR codes and your phone to have essentially small, tiny little posts that allow you to scan, with minimal text involved, currently, that allow you to scan something, link it to your phone, and then provide data from where you're standing using GPS. The value of this, and because we've been toying back and forth for about 3 years now, trying to figure out how to do this historical walk up and down Main Street, where we would put the markers, how the markers would go, what they would be used, what they would be made of. And at the end of the day, what seems to have arisen is that the best and greatest use of this stuff is actually to put the data up online, almost in a wiki format, where it can be added to and amended. So you don't have to commit at any one point to telling a single story, or even pretending that when this thing is cast in bronze or stone or wood, that you actually know everything you need to know, or add photos to it, or which inevitably becomes faded and things. So I would just argue that perhaps the technology that will drive the rest of this historical walk might be applied here, and that the hardscape, let's call it, of this park be minimal and adaptive, and also cost effective in this way, so that you can again continually change the story as new information comes to light. So I certainly would recommend that too, for consideration, and to think about how to keep the tread light, because I do think this is a continuing story. I don't think the tale has been fully told here. I know that there's certainly some thoughts about doing a full ground radar scan of this area again, and outside of the old burial ground. I think that there's more information coming as we do more research in this area. The technology has advanced tremendously since it was last done in 2008, almost revolutionary. So, my recommendation to you would be to think about this idea of crossroads, of transition, of changing cultures, and just keep it light and easy in terms of the hardscape, and adaptable. So that's my thoughts on the subject.
Thank you, Michael, so much. And I think, again, this goes back to, like, even with the QR codes and the idea of your phone and the self-guiding thing, photos of these kinds of things, of course, I would think could be included in that. And then, the disposition of the physical artifacts, maybe some go to the library, some go to the Historical Society, the new museum in Fayetteville. I'm certainly amenable to that. I mean, that, and of course, I point out at this point, we've got artifacts that go around, actually, because
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Greg Walden has some 500 of them, and those are, by the way, currently down in Connecticut. They're in safe storage some kind of vault. But you know, that I think that's all in play. But that's really, I think, Michael and Dana, it's really, really helpful. And what for me emerged out of these two conversations was the fact that there's all this stuff. This is a very fluid story. It's an evolving story. And I think what Michael suggested to me, and he just did to you, was that there's a sort of path forward to not have to have a heavy physical presence in the park, because we can evolve this, this very fluid, complicated story through Indian. You know, for instance, in the working group, there had always been this opposition, for instance, to a figurative monument. Nobody wanted a statue, in other words, of you know, a Nipmuc chief kind of thing, that it just wasn't felt as appropriate. So in a way, I think what Dan and Michael are sort of pointing toward is maybe a more again, kind of fluid approach to telling a very complicated story about the evolution of this ground. Is that fair?
And I would hope also that, you know, before all this started, or at the very early stages, we had some initial conversations, we being the Historical Commission at the time and the Historical Society, with St. Mark's, about using this as an educational opportunity, both for our students and for their students. I know that during this process, we had interest from a number of St. Mark's students about, you know, the heritage there. I just think there's a huge learning opportunity here that has been, as you said, Kevin, missed essentially entirely in all these discussions, as we were all pointing fingers about who did what, when, where. But, you know, now the fact that this thing has become reality, and I will also remind everyone that we have yet to hear from any of the Native American representatives about what they think is appropriate. That there's been a huge silence on this issue.
And I should point out that I have reached out officially from the Historical Commission a couple times by letter.
Well, as did I as former chair. I mean, this has been, you know, this has been made, these entrees, but that
the chair of the working group also had reached out to
Marguerite did, yeah,
the Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as the leader of one of a couple of the tribes, I think.
Right.
So, you know, my point being that leaving the parentheses open in effect is probably not the worst idea in terms of allowing future contribution,
right.
However that may.
Yeah, I would really, and you know, maybe at some point that we do get interest or response from Nipmuc Nation, and then it's so yeah, point well taken. You know, to leave the possibility open for their input. I can't thank you both enough. Is there anything else? Dan's got something. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I don't think that you will hear from the Nipmuc. They've got much larger legal issues that they are tackling right now than whether or not their name is going to go on a reference or included in some historic, right? We think it's really big to outreach to them, but what they are fighting for is much larger than a name on a monument or in a sign or something.
Right.
At least that's my takeaway from kind of reading some articles, that this is, for us, it's a big deal. For them, I think this is, I don't want to say small potatoes, but I think it's, you know, I think if we can keep it open as a possibility, but I think they have much larger issues. I think the only other thing that I mentioned to you was I do think that getting in touch with the Boston African American National Historic Site and getting, because he died in Charleston, I think it would be very good to just to put this on someone. I mean, and it's a national historic park, and to get that kind of on their radar, that this is what we found, this is what's going on here. And I think that might also give some more muscle to this.
Yeah, I thought that was an excellent suggestion. I'm glad you reminded me of it. And I am going to follow up on that with a letter.
And I would just add, and I concur with Dan completely, by the way, about the Nipmuc. So I was contacted by the head of programming at Chestnut Hill Farms, and they're very interested in doing some programming around Afro-American farming, and they were looking actually for an historian that would know something about these techniques. There's some anniversary coming up, and forgive me, I don't remember what it was, but that they were going to place these activities around. I suggested exactly that, was to talk to the Black History Museum, African American History Museum in Boston, and let them guide that process as to who might be able to speak to that subject, because they're an incredible resource. I've done some work with them or through Harvard, some minor things, and it just an incredible resource. And also, it's part of the story that is not very well known here in Southborough about its abolitionist. One of the bulwarks of abolitionism is, certainly a stop on the Underground Railroad, staunchly abolitionist at a time when many of the surrounding communities weren't. And I think that there would be some interest there, perhaps. I can't speak for anyone, but I think there would be some interest there in we're talking about this history, especially, with the abolitionist history in Boston. I don't know if you know, but essentially the federal troops were posted in Boston for a period of time because the people had essentially revolted against the Fugitive Slave Act. So we have a very proud story to tell here that's not been told much. And I think these folks would be a great resource to inform us more about, our own past, frankly. Certainly something the Historical Society is going to be pursuing, but we need to get the damn building finished first. So once that's gone and out of the way, we'll turn our activity to some of these attention to some of these other activities. Anyway, my dear folks, I must leave you. So I'm going to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. It's nice to see some familiar faces again. And I wish you all well in this. And let me know what we can do as the society to help you in any way possible.
Thank you, Michael. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it greatly. And let me turn now, and thank you, folks, for being so patient. I thought both Dan and Michael really had some important things to say to us, but I want to know, one last thing, and then I want to just hear what you all have to say. Is I want to show you again what the basic park. Can you see that? Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. There, you got it? Give me a nod. Yeah, okay. So now this is basically what was showed at town meeting, except I don't have the most current version, which I think I pointed out in a working group meeting that they needed to take this part here and make it look like the parking lot that it's actually going to be, so people wouldn't get mad. Kind of false advertising. So scotch this sidewalk here, which is gone, and think of this as a parking lot. But here's where we're talking about and where our concerns are, right? This is the sketch, the VHB plan for the park. And there's some, somewhat problematic issues that remain to be unresolved, because right now up at the this would basically be the northwest corner. You got a crosswalk going over to a sidewalk that doesn't exist, and there's no money, as I understand it right now, to put it in, going up toward Pilgrim Church that doesn't want a sidewalk over there. So that's a bit of an issue. But once you're in the park, you've got this big landing, right? Where basically the Burns Fiore Waters notion of this is going to have some sort of marker of training ground, burial ground, meeting house, components of a town in 1727. I think it also has to include a Nipmuc feature or a notice or something up here. I don't want it down in the lower plaza, because that sort of, the smaller plaza kind of thing You know, it's got to be co-equal, I think, with mention of the town, personally. Walkway down to this smaller plaza, walkway down to Marlborough Road, and then walkway over toward the library property, the parking lot. And that's what you're looking at. A couple of, you know, what people are describing as heritage trees. Rain garden feature here and here. I understand that's, the VHB still considers that necessary for stormwater mitigation. Native flowering trees, as you see, and then an enhanced windbreak and lawn. So it's a pretty, you know, light touch, which is what everybody was talking about, kind of feature. Okay, all that said, what do you guys, I mean, what should Grant and I tell them that we want, you know, because this is what it, I mean, I think, you know, Michael's idea of QR coding and you know, you can tell a fairly complicated story, but do you want bronze plaque? Do you want, you know, they talk about engraved bricks, a bench. I'm very much open. Jim, Michelle, Annie, especially. What do you think?
I guess I've been party to some of the society discussions as well, you know, in the past about the walk and all that. I think that one of the things that's clever about the approach that Michael's taken of a QR code that doesn't have a lot of permanent markings on it is that you are future proof. You can make the references that you want to include, expand, you can add pictures, you can add video, you can add any number of things that come to light over time. And so I think that you know, a simple QR code, I mean, maybe it needs to be bronze to, you know, for longevity. Don't know if you can do QR in bronze, but you know, something that would simply be a name and a reference. Everybody's gonna have a phone to be able to look at it. And I realize there may be some elderly people in town that won't be as you know, current with that, but if they go with family, the family can help them out. So I guess my take on it is rather than try and label, you know, come up with a, you know, detailed description, you know, a QR code that takes you to an easy to navigate, you know, reference would be useful. And the other thing I was going to comment is on the topic of location for these artifacts that we find. While it would be convenient in this walk just to go to the library to look at some things, Michael's right. There's a far larger museum planned over in the old Fayetteville Town Hall, and to me, it would make more sense to have everything in there. It could be credited as to where the source was and that it came from us and so on, you know, courtesy of. But my sense is rather than split it up into fragments, to literally, you know, combine it with the rest of the exhibits.
It might be something, maybe, Jim, that you had like a small amount at the library. If Ryan Donahue and Marguerite still, you know, chair the their board of trustees, even if they want it, but you could maybe rotate some things in there on occasion so that, you know, there's so many. Like I said, you know, Greg Walwer collected over, I believe, 500 things, and I've got from Dan Blanchard several hundred myself. At this point in various trays. So there's a lot of stuff, you know. But I thought I was really appealed to by Dan's idea that, you know, let's say this is the marmalade jar, that you could actually buy one of these jars. They still exist, you know what I mean? And display it with the piece and say, look, here's what we found, and this is what this was, kind of thing, which I just thought, I don't know, maybe Ryan Donahue, the, you know, head of the library might just love that idea. I don't know. But I haven't talked to him about it. But yeah, Michelle.
So I have just a couple of questions. So I think that the QR code and the ongoing saga, the tale of what goes on, so that it's not the final story, is a great idea. My only question is, so who keeps up the technology on that? I mean, are you talking, you know, that somebody from the Historical Commission or Historical Society is going to have to do upkeep on that? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it would be a kind of partnership affair. And, you know, Michael's idea of like a kind of wiki, you know, in the sense that Wikipedia can be edited by anybody, but there are then, of course,
oversight.
Right, there's oversight, and we would have to, I think, embrace a role as the town representative to, provide that oversight and that editorial review, which I think we'd be well qualified to do, quite frankly, in collaboration with the society. So, I think it's a nice idea. Do you guys, Michelle, I didn't mean to cut you off either. Do you have
No, I think it's a great idea.
Annie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with what's been said already. I like your idea, Kevin, of maybe having a small amount of the artifacts available nearby in the library, with the bulk of the items at the new museum. That's kind of the the purpose of a museum. So I feel like it's very fitting that artifacts largely would be home there. And I don't really have strong feelings about signage or telling the story. I don't really have strong feelings, but I would be amenable to the QR code idea. Especially if we're talking something like bronze that we know from our other projects is very expensive. I would hate to, make a large investment in some sort of signage and then have it be outdated or, decide something else would be more appropriate. So I do like the idea of a QR, where the story can evolve a bit.
Yeah, and unfortunately, at the most recent select board meeting, there was some conversation. I was present, but didn't speak about this. The select board had allocated some ARPA money toward further design work over at the park area that the working group had declined to spend, basically. And they kind of rolled that back into general tax relief, which will give everybody about $2 off their taxes. But I had kind of wished if I can, I don't know if that horse is or that ship has already sailed or whatever the cliche is, but I would have made a pitch for a little bit of that money devoted to the development of this possible wiki or some way to because even to display these things properly and not on a cookie sheet or a couple of Chinette plates doesn't come for free. You know what I mean? That we probably could use some money to develop this. And so, maybe that's a conversation we can have with our friends at the select board at some point. But I think doing some, it's in a way too, as thrilled as I am about this new Fayetteville Hall project, if the Historical Society had just stayed at the Flag Museum, it would really be perfect because of course it's right next to the park, right? You'd say, well, you interested in this stuff? Go across the street and look at it. But everything evolves, right? That's the history of the Flag School. That's the history of the St. Mark's Triangle. So Grant, what do you're the oldest pro of this of all with this? What do you think of all this?
Yeah, it's been an interesting discussion. Thanks to Mr. Weishan and Mr. Blanchard for joining us. Yeah, so I received the email from Marguerite Landry discussing the upcoming meeting. I agree that the process so far has been mainly conceptual planning, and we haven't really gotten into the details. I will say I am a bit worried that based on what I heard at not necessarily worried, but in terms of this very detailed discussion that we're having tonight, at the last select board meeting, they discussed, they're hoping that it would be the last meeting. There's this deadline of, the contractor has to come in June. So, it all sounded pretty rushed that they wanted to kind of finish this up. And then I got that kind of feeling from the chair of the working group as well. So, I'm really not sure how much we'll be able to get into this level of detail as much as I would like to.
Well,
that's just something that I'm concerned about.
Yep.
And maybe Kevin, you and I could push to discuss this. It sounds like you are planning on doing that, but in terms of the actual details, I agree a QR code can be useful. I do think that for the perhaps more technologically challenged, that having some sort of plaque or something accompanying the QR code there might be useful. I know oftentimes actually, when I'm visiting a site that has QR codes and stuff like that, personally, oftentimes I won't, it involves effort, a little bit of effort, right? But it does involve effort if it's not sitting there right under your nose, and you might just, if you're not super interested, you might just walk by it, So I do think that what I've seen, I think I showed, actually, sorry, that was to the working group. I showed a history walk presentation. I had forgotten if it was before historical or not. But some of the ones I've seen around kind of have a placard with details on whatever the historical scene that they're painting is, and then kind of in the corner, just for more information, visit either a website, or nowadays it's the QR code, which is very easy to access. In terms of what's, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I said I could imagine, let's say, the plaque that does the 3 elements of the town, a small plaque with a QR code noting the Nipmuc presence, and possibly a third plaque describing the archaeological dig that was done very briefly, and then with a QR code leading you to this wiki that would have all this information, including the report, right, and photographs of the stuff. But I agree with you, and I will say that I very much share your concern about, and of course, it's not even on that agenda to even discuss any of the historical stuff in May, and we're going to have to, politely say, well, we think this is important. But I think that what Dan and Michael's comments, and I think there's some concurrence here, sort of points toward is that if the working group or the select board, or however they work in conjunction, would be willing simply to set aside some consideration in terms of fund, some pretty modest funding, so that now that the dust is settled on this, we have some time to, sort of put this together. Because I think and just for the rest of you, the rush to sort of do this in May, it's very understandable. It has to do with the sort of basically the working season, like we've looked at this mess for 2 years or whatever, and everybody, and I'm one of them, wants to see that fixed. And so the contractor, right, is given a kind of deadline. We got to start work by such and such a date, get out there, smooth it out, grade the road, lay the asphalt, put the grass down, there's a lot of stuff that, sometimes if it's deferred, it gets denied altogether, kind of thing. So I am concerned about that. But I think I totally understand. So, and I don't want to suggest that I don't, that the town, I know why the town needs to go forward and get this going and fixed. I'm just going to make a call for, would you please leave room, consideration, the door open, and some money, so that we can give you the historical walk that was pitched in the first place and do it in a meaningful way. And I think some of the things that Dan and Michael said about viewing this as this crossroads, as this place that has a very complex, albeit fragmented story that doesn't have one through line, except change maybe, and convergence, I like that idea. By the way, the name of this park has been debated. For a while, people wanted to call it Tercentenary Park because we've got the tercentenary or tricentennial coming up in 2027. Then it was suggested, and I thought this was quite right, that sort of too much privileges the settlement point of view. In other words, like the Nipmucs get crowded out in some way by that idea. And so then the idea of Heritage Park came forward, and although that's a little bit generic, it's a more encompassing or inclusive kind of language. And I think, Grant, is that fair to say that that's the way people seem to be leaning?
Yes, I think it's been so long since we had a meeting that I honestly, and we didn't really vote on it, so I actually can't really remember, to be honest.
And I think we're principled. I don't know, and again, a few folks have feelings about that one way or another. it occurred to me after talking with Michael the other day that you might call it Crossroads Park. It's the idea that again, the roads that we have converge with the Native American trails, converge with different usage. But I don't.
The name is another aspect that really has gotten, I'd say,
Sure.
minimal attention so
Yeah,
far. We
I
talked about it
agree.
briefly at the public forum when some names were kind of thrown out there. And then I
Right.
think that we discussed it maybe 5 minutes
Right.
overall, but
Yeah. And so we're all going to do our best in May, but I don't know. I don't want to keep you guys, so we can move on from this, but I think we have some ideas. I'm just glad to know that you folks, seem to be amenable to this idea of, in other words, down in Southville, they had the bell. I find it so attractive. There it is. It tells the story. You know what I mean? Here we've got, I got plates full of broken glass and pottery, and that's an important story too, but it just doesn't, you know what I mean? It's not a big brass bell.
oh, go ahead.
No, I just think, so we're going to have to be flexible about it and creative in our storytelling. And I think that's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing that I think has been mentioned is that, I don't think the working group felt that they need to necessarily nail down all the historical details right now. But I do think it's important that, for example, if we wanted to have plaques at the plaza or something, that is included in the plan so that, we know how many plaques,
Right.
or where they're going, that kind of thing. So that way there's money for it as well. But in terms of the details, I think, to be honest, I really don't know. There's this larger question of the history walk throughout downtown. That's kind of been spearheaded so far by the Historical Society. But, if it's going to be on town land, then I would say Historical Commission and other commissions would have to, and committees would have to, take up that project and work together.
Well, I think in Michael's
That's broader,
yeah,
which I think, could be worthwhile. But so in terms of the details of what would be included where, how would it be included in this kind of broader, if there is going to be a history walk at all, in terms of nailing down the details, I think that's, that really comes into play as well.
Well, yeah, and Michael's, there'd been that earlier pitched, that was part of the original Burns Fiore Waters plan, was a kind of Freedom Trail like stripe throughout the town, which quite honestly, I don't like, because we're not Boston, and things have evolved quite a bit since 1947, I think, when the Freedom Trail was inaugurated. In terms of self-guidance. And so the Historical Society's conception of that history walk that they're talking about is completely self-guided by phone and by GPS. So it would involve no plaques, no cluttering up of, this has been an issue for the library and the library trustees, is that they've got the story walk and they've got plaques here and signs there and all that kind of stuff. And they're a little bit signed out, So I think maybe technology is sort of going to give us an opening. And of course, we'll have to discuss with the full working group what they want to see. It's not just us coming in and saying, well, this is what we got to have, but at least we have a thought, even with the thing with, and this is the last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, is that even the stuff with William Washington, right? What's a little problematic about it, a lot of times historical things aren't noted, marked on the exact spot, right? It's in this vicinity kind of deal. Nonetheless, the William Washington house site, so far as we understand it, again, is under the pollinator garden. It's not in the park. Now, that said, the one other thing I wanted to mention that Dan Blanchard said to me is, we do have that one foundation that's actually within the park. It's thought to have been an outbuilding of some sort. It's not a particularly impressive, it's some rubble and some bricks, but one way you could call attention to the whole, plates of China kind of issue is to actually fence, like with an iron fence, that part off, and say, here was, the support building or an outbuilding. You follow what I'm saying? Like, and then you tell that story. I don't know if that will get any traction on the working group, but I'd just like to put it past them. If they, you know, it's a little bit like I remember my first childhood visit to Plymouth Rock. And my sense of, you know what I mean? Like there's a big story there, but it's not really told by the rock. So, you know, I don't know. But it's something we'll bring to the working group's attention, and hopefully we can get a little airtime with them. I thank you all for this. I know that was a long conversation. The rest of it's going to be quite short, I promise. Next is the Southborough Center Historic District. Speaking of signs, signage placement. The reason I need to bring this up now is that we're in April. We placed our order in January, as you know, early January, and the runtime on that was 4 to 5 months. So I don't know, Annie, I'm going to ask you to check in with our vendor because you've been the liaison to them, and see where they're at. But we have every reason at this point, at least, to expect those signs by May or June. Maybe a little bit later. It's always the way it goes, but let's say June, let's say July. It's complicated. It's been complicated by the fact that, you know, I see the select board had executive session this morning. I believe they have it again tomorrow morning. And I hope that they're in the home stretch negotiating a contract with a new DPW head, because the DPW head is going to be really critical for us in terms of getting these signs up. But I did want to review with you folks where these signs, and we've already talked about this, but where they're going to go, because I think we need to do some outreach in some of the locations. And I'd like to see if some people will sort of step up and help me with this. Michelle, thank you. Well, let me bring up, I want to show you my screen again for a moment. Whoops, that's not it. Here we go. This is the outline. Can you see that fairly well? I know it's not great. This is the best sign I've got, or best map I've got, actually, scanned from the stuff sent to us by the National Park Service. But this is the map of the downtown district. The black border is the outline of the district. You see with my cursor, this is Main Street. This is Marlborough Road, Corderville Road, the rural cemetery, the golf course, Lattisquama, School Street, Middle Road here, and so on. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these signs, right? Because there are 7 entry points to the historic district. First is southbound on Marlborough Road, just before you can see it here. It's funny. This is the OBG, right? This is the library property. This is where my cursor is circling around. That's where the St. Mark's Park is going to be, right? So the historic district actually starts just past the park. So in the case of the placement here, I would think that the sign would go in the park, which is what I want to bring up with a working group when we meet in May, like right at the, you know how the new road is going to turn, like right at that turn, in the park, in the corner of the park. So it's going to be really nice, actually. The entry from that standpoint, coming down from Marlborough Road, the new National Debt Register District is going to have this beautiful sign and this beautiful park. Right there. So it's really great. Now that's one that I'll take up with the working group and the new DPW head when we get that person gets fully onboarded, which may take a while. Second one is northbound on Corderville Road, opposite right here, right down the bottom, the southernmost tip of the rural cemetery. Now, if you're coming north, of course, that's going to put the sign on the other side of the street, which happens to be, it's a public right-of-way near a tee on the Southborough Golf Club. And an option because, and I actually had queued up the, where these are on the map, if you like the Google Maps. Let me give you this. That's the location as you're coming north on 85. So on the right here, this is where the sign would be if it were perfectly placed. That's a tee box going up. But it could be here. It's not going to interfere with golf course operations. It could be right here, and it could be, of course, further south on Corderville. There's a high tension wire crossing right about here. You can see the wires up in the air. So it could be further south a little bit. I don't think placement is going to be a problem there. We might, I think, chat with the golf course committee people. And again, DPW head. Third one is eastbound on Main Street. That's not it. Sorry. Hard shifting around. There we go. Eastbound on Main Street, coming up this way, coming from Westboro, eastbound on Main Street, right before 54 Main. That's a Fay School building. You're coming up the hill, like from the Burnett Mansion, and you cross Parkerville, and then you're coming up the hill, and there's Fay buildings on your right. As you kind of get to near the top of the hill, there's a Fay driveway right here, and these are all Fay properties. So this is a pretty easy placement. I'm going to talk to Diane Byrne at Fay about this one. It's called the Village Path entrance to Fay School right before 54 Main, which is where my cursor is now. So the logical place is probably right about here. Again, that's a fairly easy one. If I can bring this up, it's right there. See that? You're coming up the hill. You guys recognize that. You're coming like up into the center of town. Fairly easy one. Again, I got the wrong, sorry, every time I have to flip this around, I get the wrong thing. Okay. Next, westbound on Main Street, coming this way now. The district begins with one Main Street, which is just the railroad tracks are right here, right? Imagine this is the spa, this is Morrow's, or the market, the liquor store now.
Is that the Lamy building?
Well, number one Main Street is the Knights of Columbus,
Oh,
right? So you got the railroad tracks.
okay.
This is the parcel here. This is corner of Newton and Main. That's 2 East Main. That's the vacant lot. Peter Bemis owns that
Okay.
parcel. So now this is a tricky one, and we're going to need some help on this one, because let me show you.
That's right by the railroad, right?
Yeah, it's a real hard location, because if it comes up for me, hello. Yeah, okay, imagine this is the Bemis owned parcel, the vacant lot, right? Going westbound now on Main Street. Here's the train tracks. Logically, the sign might be right before the train tracks. I don't know if that's viable. That's not the most attractive parcel currently. I have high hopes. Or where the district begins is right here, right past the tracks. The problem is that the Knights of Columbus has like a parking lot here, so you can't obstruct that. You can't get too close to the tracks. You could come up to about here, and then it would be that. I think that's viable, but we'd have to, I would like someone to reach out to the KFC people. And it's, again, when it's in the right of way, and technically you can just do it, but good citizenship, I think, involves some outreach.
Another
Kevin,
factor, Kevin, if I'm not mistaken, is that with the downtown reconstruction or project, whatever you want to call it, is that there's a lot more
To come.
concrete sidewalks, hardscape there that might be harder to place a sign.
Right,
So,
right.
I mean, these are kind of older photos, so nowadays I think there's a lot more concrete that might be harder to find a place to put it.
Well, right, and this is why, again, I'm so eager to get the new DPW head into place, so we can get there on that. But that's a tricky one. Then you've got northbound. Now this is an easy one. Northbound on Middle Road, and this is actually DCR owned land, so that's going to be an easy one. You're coming up Middle Road. This is Fay School on the left. That's 18 Middle Road on the right. It's an old farmhouse. You probably recognize it. The Historical Commission has dealings over 18 Middle. But as you come up, as you make the approach, that's all DCR land. That's the first house in the district as you come north on Middle Road. So that, again, I think that's going to be a pretty easy one where you're located, and that photo is right here.
Kevin, just as a clarification, these signs are just one-sided, right? Effectively mentioning the district.
Yeah,
but-
right
so
behind me.
Yeah, right. But they don't need to be seen by traffic coming the other way. We're only concerned about the right visibility in the direction of travel.
Exactly, exactly. So that's why, for instance, coming on Middle Road, this is going to be on the northbound side of the street over here, right where the cursor is. Because yeah, you only see it entering the district.
Well, where
It's
I was going with that is that if there's a situation on a road where it actually would be better seen on the opposite side, still facing the oncoming traffic, but on the left side, maybe that be a little too unusual, but that might be a consideration to make sure it's seen as best it can be.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And again, this will be why we need a DPW head that can say, yeah, I can do it here, or no, you just can't, kind of thing. But no, that's a very excellent point. Last two, northbound on Lattisquama, right here, that's between 22 and 20 is the district begins with the house at number 20. This is a pretty easy one. It's an area that features trees, shrubs, a telephone pole, but there's no sidewalk or current signage that would interfere with placement whatsoever. I can quickly show you is that it is on the right here, like right there. So that's an easy one. And I since that's a neighbor of mine, I've spoken to those folks. Then the last one is southbound on School Street between 8 and the commercial property at 11 Main, because actually, so here, this is a private house at 8 School Street, and the district actually begins basically here, because that's you're looking at the back of 11 Main, that's that, shopping kind of plaza. So, my recommendation is that the placement would be so as not to, interfere with the private homeowner, just over the line, basically right around here somewhere. On the 11 Main parcel, but again, it's public right of way. The question here again is it's a pretty narrow strip between the paved road and the stone wall, which you can't disturb the stone wall, that's for sure. So, again, consultation with the head of the DPW as soon as we get them into place is going to be, I think, really, really, really important. And they're pretty wide signs, so you can't also like get out into the road. So it's just in the effort to move this along, I will say that I'm going to reach out to you folks and where I need help in this. I can talk to the Fay people because I'm talking to them about all kinds of stuff anyway. I can talk to, the DPW head when it gets going, but like, I'd like to have someone take on the KFC outreach and a couple of those other ones, maybe the golf course committee people. So if it's okay, Michelle, you seem like you're
Yes.
reasonable. Thank you. So I will reach out to you, Michelle, and when I need anybody else, I'm just going to dragoon some of the rest of you into just making a couple calls.
I'll just say, Kevin, that I have a family friend who I think is involved with the Knights of Columbus there, so I can talk to him.
Good. Great. Well, feel free. And I will send out this map so that you, if you don't already have it, I think you do, but I'll send it again so you can just, really get to know what we're dealing with. Because I want to sort of, you know what I mean? I don't want people to feel surprised or sandbagged. I mean, I think people are going to be really happy about this because it's, good news. But we'll do the outreach. All right, I'm going to move on. Chair's report, very quickly, demolition delay updates. I've talked to Jim Shea again several times. The architectural drawings are out for bid. So they, know what it's going to cost. And let me unshare my screen. there we go. All right. That stuff's out for bid. I'm thrilled. And he is stepping down as the president of their board of trustees, June 30th. Diane Byrne, who's the assistant head of school for finances and operations, is going to take the lead on this. I've had some conversations with him recently about, oh my goodness, they were asking about the National Register District as it happens. We did some work. I asked Sally Waters of the Historical Society to do some research. They were trying to connect the ownership of one of the owners of the Stone House, Louis Fay Johnson, who bought the house in 1871, to if there was any link to like Eliza Bell Burnett Fay, like co-founder of Fay School, and it turns out there is. So that's actually gives it a little bit more interesting historical juice, so to speak, with regard to that there's actually a link between, you know, the Fay family, a clear link between the house and, you know, Fay's founders. I mean, albeit it's very stretched out by cousins and cousins and cousins kind of thing. But Sally Waters had traced this down to, excuse me, one David Fay of Marlborough, born in 1679. So it was a very impressive bit of genealogical research that I can send along to you if you want to see it. So the conversations go on with him. We're making good progress, and I pray we're going to get there. The other thing is 5 Corderville Road. I had a very long conversation with Andrew Abu, who was the realtor trying to broker the deal between the Hewlings, the owners of the house, and Kendall Holmes. And subsequently, I had also a very long conversation with a gentleman named Dan Berger, who's a real estate attorney representing Kendall Holmes. And they had asked me, and the outreach was basically to get me to bring it back in front of you folks to revote and to talk about it further. And this is where this is at right now. The Hewlings still own the home. Kendall hasn't bought it yet. So it's still sort of just kind of sitting there. And I said to Mr. Berger that I would, at, you know, his request, if that's what they wanted, I would happily, as a good faith gesture, bring it back to you and we could talk about it some more. But I said, the circumstances, the material circumstances that we voted on January 5th with regard to the demolition delay have not changed in any way, shape, or form. And I said, I don't speak for the commission. I don't know how they're going to vote. I don't know what they think. But what I think is that nothing's changed. He said he would get back to me if he wanted it on the agenda for tonight. And I didn't hear from him, so I didn't put it on, other than just to let you know that there's outreach, there's still conversation. And, you know, we'll see. That's that. The other thing I had on here as chair's report is the old fire station documents. I went down to, remember that when Annie and I toured the Peters School Annex and the fire station, we found a whole bunch of documents, and Rob Kuklovich at St. Mark's was very kind enough to have it all boxed up. And I went over there one day a couple of weeks ago and picked it all up, brought it all home. It was kind of 2 like copy paper type boxes full of stuff. And I went through all the stuff, every page of it. And it was very interesting. Most of it handwritten, stuff dating back to 1966. It was a 20-year period between 66 and the mid 80s. And it was mostly personnel records, timesheets, hours worked, invoices, inventories of materials owned by the fire department, correspondence. There was stuff about, there was really some very amusing things, like a letter from the Turnpike Authority. Oh, the Southborough Fire Department put out a car fire on the Mass Pike. Here's the $42.50 we owe you for your services. That kind of stuff. There was some civil defense pamphlets and training materials, but it was all stuff strictly related to the fire department. I talked to town clerk about it, and I said, do you want to scan this? Do you have any interest? The answer was no. And I reached out to Chief Achilles and I said, I've got this stuff and I think you would like to see it. I think you would find it extremely interesting. Do you want it? He said, yes. I took it over and dropped it off. And he's very happy, I can tell you, to have gotten it. So that's where we're at with that. And I'm pleased to sort of return the stuff to it, what I regard its rightful owner. I will say that the public safety building has some glass display cases out front. And I think it's the kind of stuff, there's some things that's so interesting. He might end up putting some of it in there, which I think would be really cool if you're listening, Chief Achilles, through the ether. Okay, that's it. Approved meeting minutes from March 15th, 2023. I know that Jim and Grant had already given Kate, who was really kind to do those minutes and do the edits. Anybody else have any edits for those March 15th meeting minutes? No, I have two. Just, well, I'll say it so that I'll make these changes and submit. One is on line 31, referring to, this is interesting, actually. It's not Palladium windows, but Palladian, like Palladio. And that referred to a window in the Peters School Annex, which, by the by, St. Mark's appears to have taken out. So I think they're trying to save that window, and I'm very happy about it. They've already, by the way, fenced off the whole property because they're prepping to do their business and take it down quite shortly. Related to that, incidentally, is I have spoken to Rob Kuklovich a couple times about the cupola on top of the school annex, and Michael Wyson at the Historical Society has indicated an interest in having it and doing something with it over at the new property. And so I've talked to Rob, I've asked him for it. They've got a budget to take it down up to $10,000. The open question was, who's going to get it from the current site, the 1.25 miles over to Fayetteville Hall, but I'm hopeful on that. So we might get a little win on that and save that. Stay tuned. The other meeting minute edit I have was on line 123 after the United States flag. This is a reference to the flags that are flown in the cemetery in Bourne, and it's the United States flag. And this is what I'll be adding with your approval is the POW MIA flag, and on Memorial Day, the flag of the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's the accurate, and I think I said that in the
That was line. What was that line?
The flags that are flown in Bourne, it's not just the United States flag, it's the POW MIA flag, and once a year, the Department of Veterans Affairs flag, because that's a Veterans Affairs facility in essence. I'll move to accept the March 15th meeting minutes as amended.
Second.
Great. Okay. Roll call vote. Michelle,
Yes.
Jim,
Aye.
Annie,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
and Miller is aye. So that's 5-0 to approve those meeting minutes. Also, now we got to schedule future meetings. In May, my term being over, except for the online summer stuff, I am much more free. But if we want to keep it on Wednesday, I would propose, how is Wednesday, May 24th at 7 p.m. work for you folks? That's the week before Memorial Day, so we can like do our business and go party. Or go to the backyard, as may be the case. Okay with everybody?
Open.
I actually have a conflict. Sorry.
How about Thursday, the 25th?
That's good for me.
It works.
Good.
That works for me.
Great, works for everybody. You're on. May 25th at 7 p.m. And by the way, the select board, I heard the last select board meeting, the town manager indicated that the virtual meeting thing has been extended now, I believe, through 2025, but for a while. So we don't have to worry about it. Personally, I would like to get back together in person and see you lovely people once in a while. That my objection to this has been, I really believe in the online access, And the owl is such a pain in the feathers, shall we say, right now, that until that gets worked out and is an easier thing to do, I'm reluctant. I've seen too many meetings where people want to like punch that owl thing before they can get it set up, so trying to keep it simple. But we'll, stay tuned on that. Any other business? I have none. Do you have any? Good.
I have just two quick things.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
First is that I don't know if you guys know, but the Mass Historical Commission has a series of virtual workshops that I think they started during COVID. And I think they're weekly or I can't remember how frequent, every other week or something like that. But there is one coming up this Friday on demolition delay bylaws.
What time is that, Grant?
I think it's unfortunately like 10 a.m. But one thing, if you register for it, you can get the recording of it later. If you don't register, then for whatever reason, they don't make the recording available. So I just wanted to let you know about that, and I can send out the link to.
Yeah, I think
register for
you
that.
sent it. Would you resend it to all of us? I'm going to do it for sure, because this is like, we really got to get working on like the redrafting the language. And so, one thing like Annie, remember Annie had done that quick work about like how many more, structures would be brought in kind of thing. And Grant, you and I had discussed, I'll just throw this out here now and then we can't discuss it, but because it's not on the agenda, but when the demolition delay bylaw was initially passed, it basically, goes back to 1925. That was 95 years from past, because it was passed in, I might say this right. Am I right about this, Grant? We had figured this out.
I was 90. I think it was 90.
Was it 90?
1925 to 2015. Right.
That's right. Okay, that's right. 90 years. And if we go back, maybe the thing to do, this would be less, because I had floated maybe the idea of 75 years. But what if you just did it as, again, on a sliding scale, 90 years?
Mhm.
So then it doesn't have quite the reach, because I'm concerned about like people, overreaching, feeling that we're doing that. So if we just keep it, the original terms when it was passed was 90 years. If we propose going forward a sliding scale of 90 years, I think that might be palatable to people. But anyway, a conversation for another time because it's not on the agenda. But thank you for mentioning that, Grant.
Yeah, I did confirm it is 10 a.m. this Friday. Just
10 a.m. Okay.
I'm interested. So yeah, if you could email the information to everyone, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'll do that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, just one other thing. At our last meeting, I just wanted to bring this up because I said that I would draft, or we agreed that I would draft a letter on the flags in the old burial ground. I did draft something, but Kevin and I discussed it and thought that with the new select board coming in later this month, that it might be wise to potentially wait until a new board has taken place to kind of send that off. So I just wanted to let you know that that's why it wasn't on the on the agenda for today. But do you want to say anything about that, Kevin?
No, but we'll revisit in May for sure, and maybe have a clearer sense that we don't waste time or spin our wheels. So yeah, May I think is good. All right, that's it. Thank you. Public comment. Going once, going twice. Sold. No public comment. That's it. Oh, we have to vote to adjourn. Would someone make that motion? This is where I'm missing Kate's, template. It's Ricky,
I move to adjourn.
thank you. All right, seconded by Annie. I'm just going how I see you on the screen. Michelle,
Yes.
Annie,
Yes.
Grant,
Yes.
Jim,
Aye.
and Miller is aye, 5-0 to adjourn. Thank you very much. And thanks for your patience with that long conversation about the St. Mark's Street Park. It's really been bedeviling me for, and Grant too, I'm sure, for a long time. So it's nice to get just the feeling that, you know, you guys kind of get it. We're on the same page, and hopefully we'll do something good at that meeting in May. So you'll hear about it, alas. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Meeting
Have a good night.